My grandson tricked me into signing away my fortune, but he didn't expect what happened next. My name is Eleanor. I am 78 years old, and though these eyes have grown dim with age, they have witnessed things no mother, no grandmother should ever have to see. You see, betrayal does not always come from strangers or enemies. Sometimes it comes from the very hands you once held to cross the street. From the very lips that once kissed your cheek and called you grandma. I thought I had known pain before. I buried my husband, Harold, after 52 years of marriage. I raised 3 children on my own after he passed. And when they went on to start families of their own, I gave everything I had, my time, my savings, my love, to ensure they never struggled the way I once did. I believed my purpose in these twilight years was simple, to love and to guide. And most of all, to pour my heart into my grandchildren. That's where James comes in. James was my first grandson. The moment I held him in my arms, swaddled in that blue hospital blanket, I felt a fire of love so strong it startled me. I thought to myself, this is my second chance. A chance to give the kind of unconditional love I sometimes failed to give my own children when life was too hard, when the bills were too high, when my own grief weighed me down. James grew up in my home as much as his own. He would run into my kitchen, small feet pattering on the tiles, and demand cookies before dinner. He would fall asleep on my lap as I told him stories of our family, stories I thought would root him in love and history. To me, James wasn't just a grandson. He was the beating heart of my old age, and maybe that's why what he did cut deeper than any knife. You see, when you love someone that much, you never imagine they could use that love against you. You never think those innocent eyes could one day look at you with calculation instead of affection. But that day came. It started small. A little request here, a little paper there. James was always so helpful. Grandma, let me help you with your bills. These papers are confusing. You shouldn't strain your eyes. I thought it was kindness. I thought it was love. But as the days passed, I began to notice something strange. A shadow in his eyes. A sharpness in his voice when he thought I wasn't paying attention. And then, one morning, a letter came in the mail. A letter that would unravel everything. But before I tell you about that letter, I want you to understand something. Betrayal, especially by blood, doesn't happen all at once. It comes in whispers, in tiny cracks you ignore, in moments where you choose to trust because the alternative is too painful to believe. I ignored the signs, and that, perhaps, was my greatest mistake, because James wasn't just after my affection anymore. He was after my fortune. The money Harold and I had spent a lifetime saving, the inheritance I planned to leave for all my grandchildren equally, the home that had stood for generations. Everything I had, everything I was became a target, and all it took was one signature, one pen, one trembling hand that trusted too much. Signed away my fortune without even realizing it, and the day I discovered the truth was the day my heart nearly broke in, too. But here's the thing James didn't know. Here's the thing he never expected. You can take away money, you can strip away property, but you cannot destroy a soul that has survived loss, hardship, and betrayal before. I may be old, but I am not weak. And the story of how I faced James, how I found the strength to rise after his betrayal, is the story I want to share with you now. Because somewhere out there, another grandmother, another parent, another soul might be sitting in silence, nursing the same wounds. And maybe, just maybe, my voice will give them the courage to speak. So sit with me, dear listener. Listen closely, because this isn't just a story of loss. It's a story of awakening, of resilience, and of a love stronger than betrayal. And it all began with the boy I once cradled in my arms. My home has always been my sanctuary. A little white cottage on the edge of town, with green shutters Harold painted himself decades ago, and a porch swing that creaks with the sound of memories. Every flower in the garden was planted with love. The roses by the front gate came from cuttings Harold's mother gave me on our wedding day. The oak tree in the backyard, oh, that mighty oak, was planted when my first child was born. It wasn't just a house. It was a history book made of wood and stone, holding every laughter, every tear, every dream my family ever shared. James grew up here almost as much as in his own parents' home. His mother, my daughter Margaret, worked long hours at the hospital, and James often ended up staying with me after school. I didn't mind. Truth be told, I cherished it. We had routines. I'd sit on that porch swing while James ran circles in the yard, chasing fireflies in the summer, stomping in piles of autumn leaves, or rolling snowballs in the winter. Every night, when he was small, he would climb into bed in the guest room, though I always called it his room, and I would tuck him in with the same quilt Harold's grandmother had sewn. "Tell me a story." "Grandma," he'd whisper, and I always did. Stories about how Harold and I met, about how our family came to America with nothing but hope, about the mistakes we made and the lessons we learned. James would listen with wide eyes, his little hands clutching the blanket. As though every word was gold, I thought, naively, that I was planting seeds of wisdom in his heart. But seeds can grow in strange directions. As James got older, I noticed changes. He was clever, far too clever for his own good. By high school, he was already talking about big money, about how he was going to make millions, how he would never waste his life working a 9-to-5 like everyone else. I admired his ambition, but there was a sharpness in his tone. Sometimes when he looked at me, it wasn't the gaze of a loving grandson. It was the calculating stare of someone sizing up value. Still, I brushed it aside. After all, every generation talks differently. Maybe this was just his way of dreaming big. When Harold passed away, James was one of the first to comfort me. He hugged me tighter than anyone, whispering, "Don't worry, Grandma, I'll always look after you." And I believed him. It was around that time he began helping with my finances. Bills had grown confusing, paperwork overwhelming. "Let me handle it, Grandma," James would insist. "I know you get headaches reading all that small print." I thought it was kindness. After all, he was family. He was the boy I raised, the one I trusted with my deepest secrets. I gave him access to my checkbook, my accounts, my documents. It felt natural. It felt safe. But trust, I would soon learn, is the most dangerous weapon in the wrong hands. At first, I noticed little things. An extra withdrawal here, a missing statement there. When I asked, James would smile and say, "Oh, Grandma, you must have forgotten. You gave me permission to use it for the groceries." Or, "That's just a bank fee. Nothing to worry about." And because I trusted him, I let it go. I told myself he's my grandson. He would never hurt me. But there were moments, fleeting moments, when I caught a glimpse of something dark in his eyes. Like the time he asked about the value of my house, or when he pressed me to tell him exactly how much savings I had tucked away. He laughed it off as curiosity, but deep inside, a whisper began to stir. Something wasn't right. One winter evening, as snow blanketed the garden and the house was filled with the crackle of the fireplace, James sat at the dining table with a stack of papers. "Grandma," he said smoothly, "these are just routine documents. Insurance forms, tax papers. You know how confusing these things are. Just sign here and I'll take care of the rest." I hesitated. The paper was full of words I didn't understand, legal jargon that made my head spin. James leaned closer, his smile reassuring, his voice dripping with affection. "Trust me, Grandma. I'd never let anything bad happen to you." And with that, I signed. I signed away more than I could have ever imagined. At the time, I didn't know. I thought I was simply signing a form to ease his burden, to let him help me as he always had. But what I had really signed was the key to everything I owned: my house, my savings, my inheritance. James had orchestrated it perfectly. With one stroke of a pen, I had unknowingly transferred my fortune to him. And yet, for weeks, I lived in blissful ignorance. He continued visiting, continued smiling, continued calling me his sweet old lady. I baked him pies, knitted him scarves, and told him stories, never realizing the trap I was already in. Until the day the letter arrived. A thick envelope from the bank, addressed to me. Inside, cold words printed in black ink. Notice of property transfer. My hands trembled. My breath caught in my chest. I read the lines again and again, unable to comprehend. The house was no longer mine. My accounts were no longer mine. Everything Harold and I had worked for, gone, signed away, by me, by my own hand. The world around me blurred. I felt the walls closing in, the air growing heavy. And in that suffocating moment, one truth pierced my heart. James. My James. He had taken it all. I sat in my living room, the letter clutched in my shaking hands, the fire in the hearth burning low. The familiar comfort of the crackling logs and the ticking grandfather clock suddenly felt foreign, like props in a play where I no longer belonged. Property transfer, effective immediately, signed, by Eleanor Whitmore. That last line pierced me deeper than any knife. My own name, my own signature, staring back at me, had it all been I thought back to that winter evening, to James's smile, to his soft voice assuring me it was nothing. That memory, once warm, now burned like poison in my veins. Had it all been an act? The boy who once clung to my skirts, who begged for bedtime stories, who kissed my cheek with sticky jam-stained lips. Was he ever truly mine? Or had he always been watching, waiting, calculating? I felt sick. When James came by later that week, cheerful as ever, I confronted him. "James," I whispered, holding the letter out to him. "What is this?" His smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before returning, wider this time, almost mocking. "Oh, that," he said casually, tossing the paper back onto the table. "It's nothing, Grandma. Just some restructuring. Don't worry, you'll still live here. I'm just managing things more efficiently now." "Managing things?" My voice cracked. "James, this says the house isn't mine anymore, that everything is yours." He leaned back in his chair, his hands behind his head, his eyes gleaming with a smugness I had never seen before. "Well," he said slowly, as though speaking to a child. "Technically, yes, but you signed it, Grandma. You gave it all to me. It's legal. There's nothing you can do." The room spun. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. "I trusted you," I whispered, tears filling my eyes. "I raised you like my own." "How could you trust?" He cut me off, his tone suddenly sharp. "That's the problem, Grandma. You've lived your whole life trusting people, trusting that hard work would keep you safe, trusting that family meant loyalty. But the world doesn't work like that anymore. It's about power, money, control, and now I have it." His words sliced through me. This wasn't my James. This was a stranger wearing his face. I clutched the edge of the table, trying to steady myself. "James, please. This house, this money, it's not just mine. It's your grandfather's legacy. It's our family's history," he scoffed. "History doesn't pay bills, Grandma. History doesn't buy yachts or penthouses. You've been sitting on a gold mine living like some small-town widow. I'm just unlocking its real potential." I stared at him, searching for some flicker of the boy I knew. But all I saw was cold ambition. That night when he left, he didn't hug me. He didn't kiss my cheek. He simply said, "Get used to it, Grandma. This is the new reality." And then he was gone. The weeks that followed were a blur of lawyers, phone calls, and heartbreak. Every attempt I made to reverse what had happened ended with the same crushing answer. "It's legal." "You signed the papers." Friends I confided in shook their heads in disbelief. Some pitied me, some judged me, but none could undo what had been done. Worse than the financial loss was the silence in the house. The laughter, the warmth, the sense of belonging, it had all evaporated. Each creak of the floorboards reminded me of betrayal. Each photo frame whispered of love turned sour. One evening, desperate for clarity, I called Margaret, my daughter, James's mother. Surely she would see the wrong in this. Surely she would defend me. But when I explained, her voice was hesitant, even defensive. "Mom." James told me you gave it to him willingly. He said you wanted him to have control before it's too late. Before it's too late. The words stung like acid. Margaret, I cried, do you honestly believe I would give away everything? That I would sign away my home, my savings, my life's work? She sighed heavily. I don't know what to believe, but James has always been good with money. Maybe it's for the best. I hung up the phone that night with a hollowness I can't put into words. My daughter, the child I had birthed, raised, and loved, had chosen to stand by her son. Not by me. The betrayal deepened. It wasn't just James. It was Margaret, too. I felt like an intruder in my own family. One afternoon, I walked through the house, touching the walls, the furniture, the photographs. Everything held a story. Harold's chair by the fireplace, the china cabinet with plates from our 40th anniversary, the embroidered cushion James made for me in second grade, still sitting on the porch swing. And yet, in the eyes of the law, none of it was mine anymore. It belonged to James. I wasn't Eleanor, the homeowner. I was Eleanor, the squatter. I wept that night, not just for what I lost, but for what James had become. The betrayal wasn't only about money. It was about love. Love that had been twisted, exploited, and discarded. And the cruelest part, I had handed him the weapon myself, my trust, my pen, my signature. But betrayal, as deep as it cuts, often plants a seed of resilience, one that grows quietly, stubbornly, waiting for the right moment to push through the soil. James thought he had won, but he had underestimated one thing. I was still alive, and I still had a voice. The night James left me broken at the kitchen table, something inside me hardened. I cried, yes, my tears fell hot and heavy into my lap. But when the storm passed, a new resolve took its place. If my own flesh and blood thought he could erase me with a forged signature, then he didn't know the woman who raised him. I was Eleanor Whitmore. I had survived the Great Recession, buried a husband, raised 2 children on a teacher's salary, and held this farm together when banks and fate tried to tear it away. And I would survive this too. The betrayal had wounded me, but it had not destroyed me. Not yet. The first step was knowledge. I knew enough from Harold's years as a lawyer to understand that signatures could be challenged if proven fraudulent. I didn't have much, but I had something James didn't think I had anymore: old friends. So, the next morning, I dialed the number of Samuel Price, Harold's former partner at the law firm downtown. Eleanor? His voice cracked with surprise when he picked up. It's been years. Yes, Samuel, I said softly, my voice trembling. And I'm sorry to trouble you, but I need help. It's about James. Within an hour, I sat in Samuel's office, the transfer letter spread out across his mahogany desk. His bushy eyebrows furrowed as he read, his finger tracing the curves of the signature. Finally, he leaned back, eyes sharp. This isn't your hand, Eleanor. I exhaled shakily. I thought so, but everyone tells me it's legal that I signed it. He shook his head firmly. No, whoever did this tried to mimic your writing, but I've seen your signature 100 times. Harold and I both notarized your documents. This stroke here, too stiff. This loop, unnatural. A handwriting expert could confirm it. My heart pounded. So, it is fraud? It's forgery, he said flatly. And if we can prove it, James could be facing serious consequences. For the first time in weeks, a glimmer of hope flickered inside me. The investigation began quietly. Samuel contacted a handwriting analyst who studied the documents I had signed in the past: wills, bank forms, even Christmas cards. He compared them to the transfer paper. Days later, the verdict came back. It's a forgery, Samuel told me over the phone. No doubt about it. Relief and grief collided inside me. Relief that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts had been right. Grief that my grandson, my own James, had done something criminal against me. I thought it couldn't cut deeper. But it did, because when James caught wind of what I was doing, he stormed into my house, his face red with rage. Why are you trying to ruin me, Grandma? He shouted, slamming his fists on the table. Ruin you? I shot back, my voice steadier than I felt. "You ruined yourself, James. You forged my name." "You stole from me," he sneered. "Nobody will believe you. You're old, forgetful. Everyone thinks you signed it willingly. Who's going to side with you over me?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time I saw a stranger. His arrogance, his cruelty, his utter lack of remorse, it chilled me to the bone. "You're wrong, James," I whispered. "The truth will speak louder than your lies." He laughed bitterly and walked out, slamming the door behind him. But as his car disappeared down the drive, I made a silent vow. I will not let him win. The weeks turned into months. Samuel helped me file a case, gathering every shred of evidence we could. Witnesses came forward too, neighbors who recalled seeing James shove papers in front of me, friends who noticed how nervous I looked afterward. Piece by piece, the puzzle formed, but still doubt gnawed at me. Courtrooms were intimidating. Judges were skeptical. What if my voice shook? What if they dismissed me as a confused old woman? The night before the trial, I sat by Harold's chair in the living room, clutching the cushion James had made me when he was little. "How did we get here, Harold?" I whispered to the empty room. "How did love turn into this?" The silence gave no answer, but the fire's warmth seemed to wrap around me, steadying my heart. I closed my eyes and prayed for strength. The courtroom was colder than I imagined, its walls tall and unfeeling, its air heavy with judgment. James sat at the defendant's table, sharp suit, slicked hair, his lips curled in confidence. Margaret was there too, sitting stiffly behind him, her eyes avoiding mine. I wanted to weep, but I couldn't. Not here. When the judge finally called my name, Eleanor Whitmore, "Please take the stand." I rose slowly, each step echoing like a drumbeat in my chest, and as I took my seat, I felt the weight of generations behind me. Harold, my parents, even the younger James that I once knew. This wasn't just about money. It was about truth. It was about love that deserved respect, and I would not let betrayal write the final chapter of my story. The hush of the courtroom was thick as a storm. Wooden benches creaked as townsfolk leaned forward, eager to witness the scandal that had been whispered about in grocery aisles and church pews. And there I was, Eleanor Whitmore, 78 years old, standing beneath the gavel's shadow. The clerk held out the Bible. My frail hand trembled as I placed it on the cover, swearing to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. My gaze flicked to James, my grandson, my boy. He sat there in a pressed navy suit, his jaw sharp, his expression unreadable. But I saw it, the flicker of arrogance, the belief that this courtroom was just another game he could win. He thought I was weak. He thought I was powerless. But he had forgotten something. Even the oldest tree in the forest has roots that run deep. Samuel, steady as ever, rose first. "Mrs. Whitmore, could you please tell the court in your own words how this all began?" My throat tightened, but I spoke. I told them of Harold, of the home we built, of the savings we tucked away for our children and grandchildren. I painted James not as a monster, but as the boy I once adored, the boy who ran through my kitchen demanding cookies, the boy who fell asleep with his head on my lap. And then I told them how it changed, how the boy became a man who slid papers across my kitchen table, his smile warm, his voice persuasive. How my hands, worn with arthritis, signed where he told me to, never suspecting betrayal could live in my own bloodline. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge leaned forward, listening. When I finished, my voice cracked. I didn't know I was signing away everything. My home, my savings, my security, all of it. Samuel nodded gently. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore. No further questions for now." Then came James's lawyer, slick as oil. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, pacing. "You admit you signed the papers, correct?" "Yes," I whispered. "And you admit your grandson was present when you signed?" "Yes." "Then isn't it true, ma'am, that you simply regret your decision? That you willingly gave him control, and now you're having second thoughts?" His words stabbed, but I held firm. No, I didn't know what I was signing. James deceived me, the lawyer smirked. Is it possible, Mrs. Whitmore, that at your age, your memory isn't what it used to be? Gasps rippled through the courtroom. My cheeks burned. The insult hung in the air like smoke. But before I could answer, Samuel rose. Objection, Your Honor. That is ageist and irrelevant. We have expert testimony. The judge banged his gavel. Sustained. Move on. And then it happened. The moment that changed everything. Samuel called the handwriting expert. A bespectacled man shuffled to the stand, carrying stacks of papers. With a projector, he displayed my authentic signatures beside the one on the property transfer. Notice here, he said, circling loops and lines. Mrs. Whitmore's authentic signature shows consistent fluidity. The forged one is shaky, hesitant. And this curve, completely inconsistent with her natural writing. He turned to the judge. This is a forgery. I am willing to swear under oath. Murmurs erupted. My chest swelled, not with joy, but with vindication. The truth was clawing its way to the surface. James's lawyer sputtered. That doesn't prove intent. For all we know, Mrs. Whitmore authorized him and simply forgot. But then Samuel dropped the bombshell. He produced witness testimony. Neighbors who recalled James pressuring me, sliding papers toward me while I looked confused. A bank teller who remembered James depositing large sums into his account right after the transfer. And then, the final blow. Samuel held up a recording. Mrs. Whitmore, could you explain this to the court? I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. It was a voicemail. I had forgotten it, buried it in my phone. But Samuel had found it. James's voice filled the courtroom. Don't worry, Grandma. Just sign it. You won't even notice the difference. Gasps filled the room. The judge's face darkened. James's mask cracked. His jaw clenched, his fists balled. For the first time, he looked uncertain. The cross-examination was brutal. His lawyer tried to twist, to spin, to claim it was all a misunderstanding. But the evidence was too strong. Finally, James himself took the stand. He avoided my eyes as he spoke, his voice dripping with fake remorse. I was just trying to help her. Grandma doesn't understand finances. I never meant to hurt her. I wanted to scream, but I stayed silent. Then Samuel asked the final question. James, if you never meant harm, why did you deposit over $400,000 into your personal account just 2 days after the transfer? The courtroom fell silent. James stammered, his face pale, and in that silence I knew. The battle was over. The judge's ruling came swift and heavy. This court finds that the property transfer was obtained through fraud and coercion. It is hereby nullified. Furthermore, the defendant, James Whitmore, is ordered to return all misappropriated funds immediately. Given the severity of the deception, this case will also be referred for criminal investigation. The gavel slammed. I closed my eyes, tears slipping down my cheeks. Justice. At last. But victory didn't feel like celebration. It felt like mourning. As the courtroom emptied, James wouldn't look at me. He stormed past, his face twisted with anger, shame, and something else. Fear, I whispered as he passed, my voice breaking. I would have given you everything, James. All you had to do was ask. He paused. For just a second, I thought I saw regret flicker in his eyes. But then he walked away. When I returned home that evening, the farmhouse stood tall against the horizon, its windows glowing with warmth. My home, my history, my proof that love could outlast betrayal. I sat in Harold's chair, clutching the old cushion James had made me as a child. I thought of all the memories, the laughter, the birthdays, the Christmases. Betrayal had scarred me, but it had not defined me, because the truth, once spoken, is stronger than any lie. And though my heart ached, I felt something else too. Strength. The strength of every grandmother who has ever stood up and said, enough. The weeks after the trial passed like slow-moving clouds, heavy, lingering but eventually giving way to light. The farmhouse was mine again. The papers were restored, the bank accounts corrected, and for the first time in months, I slept without the weight of dread pressing on my chest. But victory did not erase the ache in my heart Because at the end of the day, this wasn't about money. It wasn't about land. It was about trust. And trust, once broken, does not heal with a court order. Neighbors stopped by often, their arms filled with casseroles, pies, or fresh bread. They patted my hands, told me I was brave, told me justice had been served. But when the evenings grew quiet, when the sun dipped behind the hills and shadows filled the rooms, I felt the emptiness. James had not come back. Not to apologize, not to explain, not even to shout. The silence of his absence was louder than any gavel. One evening, I sat on the porch in Harold's old rocking chair, the summer air warm against my skin. Fireflies blinked across the yard. I thought of Harold, of the family we built, of the boy who once picked wildflowers for me and said, "Grandma, you're my favorite person in the whole world. How did that boy become the man who betrayed me?" The question haunted me, but I realized something. Sometimes the answers don't matter. Sometimes what matters is what we choose to carry forward. I could carry bitterness. I could let betrayal sour every memory, every smile, every shared moment with James. Or I could carry the lesson. Forgiveness, I learned, does not mean forgetting. It does not mean excusing. It does not mean letting someone hurt you again. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, a way to lay down the weight so you can keep walking without breaking. I forgave James in my heart. Not for him, but for me. But trust? Trust would never return. And that was something I had to live with. A month later, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name scrawled in messy handwriting I knew too well. Inside was a single page. "Grandma, I don't know why I did what I did." Greed, pride, desperation, maybe all of it. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. I lost more than money. I lost you. James. Tears blurred the ink. I pressed the letter to my chest. It wasn't enough to mend the wounds, but it was something. A crack in the wall he had built. Maybe one day he would find his way back. Maybe not. But either way, I had peace knowing the truth had been spoken. I often tell this story now. Not to shame James, not to dwell on pain, but to warn others, grandparents, parents, anyone who trusts too blindly. Evil does not always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from those we love most. And yet, even in betrayal, there can be strength. Because standing up, speaking out, and fighting for what is right is how we honor ourselves. Today, the farmhouse is still filled with laughter. My children and other grandchildren visit often. We cook, we tell stories, we sit around the fire and remember Harold. Life goes on. And I sit in my rocking chair, watching the sun sink into the horizon, feeling both the scars and the strength that came from this battle. If there is one lesson I want you, whoever is listening to my story, to remember, it is this: protect what you've built. Question what doesn't feel right. And never, ever believe that age makes you powerless, because even the oldest tree can weather the fiercest storm, and I am proof.